the constitutional limitations on the power of taxation. So, ano ba yung constitutional limitations? But before we go to the constitutional limitations on the power of taxation, we might as well define what a constitution is. So, a constitution is the fundamental law of the land, written or unwritten, that establishes the character of the government by defining the basic principles to which the society must conform, by describing the organization of the government and regulations, limitations and distributions of the functions of the different government departments, and by prescribing the extent and manner of the exercise of its sovereign powers. It is a legislative charter from which the government or group derives its authority to act. So, ano yung constitution nga ulit? By that definition, simple lang ang constitution. It is a written contract between the state and its people. How the state is going to conduct its business for the benefit of the people, and how the people are going to follow the directives of the government to achieve that the vision the government has for its people. Yun lang ang ibig sabihin ng constitution. Being a contract, it has the force and effect of the law. So, kaya nagiging batas yan. Kasi kontrata yan between the state and its people. So, as a contract, between these two parties, law na yan, na dapat sundin. No one can violate it. So, kaya kapag merong mga, laws na ginagawa ang Congress, which are in violation of the Constitution, dinideclare yan na unconstitutional, meaning illegal, by reason of violating the Constitution. Now, yung lahat ng breach of law are illegal. And the breach of law, but the breach of the Constitution, you call it unconstitutional. So, lahat ng violation ng batas, illegal. Violation ng Constitution, illegal. Pero hindi natin, usually nilalagyan natin yan ang term na unconstitutional para ma-distinguish anong batas yung na-violate. Okay? So, ano-ano yung mga nakalagay sa Constitution na dapat sundin ng Estado at gobyerno ng tao, Estado at ng tao. So, isa-isahan natin yung una. Observance of due process of law and equal protection of the laws. Tignan ko nga kung ma-share ko sa inyo yung PowerPoint. May presentation na akong ginawa for you, pero tingnan ko kung ma-share ko. Meron na palang recording. Isa-isahin na lang natin based on this presentation. double yung na-open na ano na Zoom. So, share ko muna yung screen. Okay. Nakikita nyo ba? Nakikita nyo ba yung screen? Comment mo.
Yes, ma'am.
Ha? Okay, sige. Teka muna. Mahirap maging teacher sa online eh. Ang dami mo dapat matutunan sa computer. Ayaw. Okay, hindi ko kayo nakikita. Okay. Buong screen natin, ano? So, number 1, the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable. Uniformity relates to classification of taxpayers to be subjected to cash. Equitable, on the other hand, refers to the ability to pay the tax of those that belong to the same class. So, the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable. Yun ang sabi sa Constitution. So, when we talk about being equitable and uniform, nasa legislation yan ng batas. Kung paano gagawa ng batas yung Kongreso. So, pag sinabi nating uniform, kailangan may valid classification. So, kunyari, sinabing gano'n ng batas, lahat ng tao sa Pilipinas magbabayad ng piso as an income tax. Is that uniform? Kasi piso lang naman lahat ng tao. Lahat ng member ng Estado magbabayad ng piso. Kung titignan mo, uniform yan kasi piso lang naman yan. But if you're going to analyze the people who are going to be subjected to that piso, hindi mo masasabi ang uniform kasi may mga batang kapapanganak pa lang. Can they pay 1 peso? No. May mga disabled na wala namang hanap buhay. Hindi sila makakabayad. Mga pulubi na nanghihingi lang ng piso, ibibigay pa nila yung piso nila. So, in that sense, that is not uniform because there is no valid classification. So, kailangan mayroong valid classification. And from that valid classification, tsaka ka palang makakapag-impose ng uniform tax rates. So, kapag when it talks about being equitable, kung kayang magbayad, magbabayad. Kung hindi kayang magbayad, hindi magbabayad. So, magkasama palagi yan, uniformity and equity. The concept of uniformity in taxation implies that all taxable articles or properties of the same class shall be taxed at the same rate. So, una muna, magkaroon ka ng valid classification and then lahat ng taong nandun sa classification na yun or yung objects na nandun sa classification na yun ay ma-impose ang same tax rates. It requires the uniform application and operation without discrimination of the tax in every place where the subject of the tax is found. It does not require, however, absolute identity or equality under all circumstances, but subject to reasonable classification. Uniformity signifies geographical uniformity. A tax is uniform when it operates with the same force and effect in every place where the subject is found. Uniformity in taxation versus equality in taxation. Uniformity in taxation means that the person or things belonging to the same class shall be taxed at the same tax rate. It is distinguished from equality in taxation in that the latter requires that the tax imposed to be determined on the basis of the value of the property. So, pagdating sa uniformity, yung classification yon. Pagdating sa equality, dun sa kakayahang magbayad yon. So, uniformity means the standards that are used therefore are substantial and not arbitrary. Fair yung standard. The categorization is germane to achieve the legislative purpose. The categorization is relevant to the purpose of the law. The law applies, all things being equal, to both present and future conditions. And the classification applies equally well to all those belonging to the same class. So these are the requisites of uniformity. You have to memorize all these items para malaman nyo, uniform ba yung application, uniform ba yung batas? Para ba sa lahat yung batas? Na-achieve ba nung batas yung purpose ng paggawa nito? And will this apply not only to the present condition but also to the future condition? So the next will be equitable or equity in taxation. The present constitution adds that the rule of taxation shall also be equitable, which means that the tax burden must be imposed according to the taxpayer's capacity to pay. So yun yung diniscuss ko na sa inyo kanina, uniformity, valid classification, and then equity pertains to the capacity to pay. Now, the Constitution imposes progressive system of taxation. The Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. Tax system is progressive when the rate increases as the tax base increases. Kunyari, piso, syempre, maliit lang yung tax rate niyan compared sa 100 pesos. Habang tumataas yung tax base mo, tumataas yung tax rate mo. Yun ang ibig sabihin ng progressive system of taxation. Habang tumataas yung tax base, tumataas yung tax rate. So what is the reason for progressive system of taxation? The explicit mention of progressive taxation in Constitution reflects the wish of the Commission that the legislature should use the power of taxation as an instrument for a more equitable distribution of wealth. So para yung mayayaman, malaki yung makuha sa kanila, ma-distribute naman doon sa mahihirap. Para yung mahihirap, hindi habang panahong mahirap, may opportunity silang magkaroon din ng kanilang sariling opportunity na makaalis doon sa kahirapan. Ang opposite ng progressive system of taxation is regressive system of taxation. So sa income tax, progressive yan. Kasi habang tumataas yung tax base, tumataas din yung tax rate. But this is not true when it comes to VAT. VAT is somewhat regressive in form. Kasi habang bumibili ka, dumadami yung opportunity mo mabawasan yung tax mo. Kasi yung tax is output minus input. Kapag bumili ka ng marami kang input. At pwedeng yung input mo, mas marami doon sa output mo. Pagka ganun na situation, yung mas marami yung makokolekta, mababawasan yung taxes mo. Kasi mas marami yung binili mo, mas marami kang taxes, ibabalik sa iyo ng gobyerno yung taxes na in excess of the output. In that sense, regressive ang VAT. Is that prohibitive? No. Ang generally, VAT, tax should be progressive to distribute. Pero kasi minsan sa VAT, ini-encourage mo rin yung investors yung malalaking investors, ini-encourage natin mag-invest sa ating bansa. So VAT is a way of attracting these people to invest in our country. Yun yung purpose ng VAT para magkaroon ka ng maraming investor. Kasi kung yung investor, mag-invest siya tapos ang liit lang ng mapupunta sa kanya, hindi na yan hindi na yan mag-i-invest sa atin. So therefore, yung VAT somehow is a regressive form. Partly regressive. Kung mas malaki yung binili kaysa sa naibenta, nagkakaroon ng regressive effect ang VAT. Pero kung mas malaki naman yung binenta kaysa dun sa binili, then VAT becomes progressive. So our next will be, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied of the equal protection of the laws. So, pag sinabi nating due process, it simply means due notice, pabatid. Ipababatid lang sa'yo ng estado na kukuhanin yung property mo, kukuhanin yung life mo, kukuhanin yung liberty mo. Can the state take the life of the people? Yes. Kaya nga noon merong capital punishment. The state can take the life of the citizen. Kung yung citizen na yon ay hindi nagpa-follow ng common good. Kung ang purpose ng estado ay common good and this person violates common good, then that person can be put into prison. So if the violation is grave, then his life can be taken. Under the statehood, yun yung concept. Lahat tayo, mga tao, ay human resource lang. Resource lang tayo ng gobyerno. So kung hindi tayo susunod sa mga patakaran ng gobyerno, tatanggalan tayo ng property, tatanggalan tayo ng kalayaan, at worst, tatanggalan tayo ng buhay. So we have to know kailan tayo pwedeng tanggalan ng buhay. Kailan tayo pwede tanggalan ng property? Kailan tayo pwede tanggalan ng kalayaan? So, it is only after due process, after due notice. Kailangan mabatid natin. Ba't mo ako tinatanggalan ng buhay? So, ganun din yun sa taxation. Hindi ka pwedeng kolektahan ng tax without being assessed properly, without being notified na kailangan mong magbayad ng tax, and without being explained to you kung bakit kailangan kang magbayad ng tax. Ganon din sa mga ordinary, when it comes to imprisonment or taking away of liberty, kailangan meron kang warrant of arrest. Yun yung notice, warrant of arrest. In criminal cases, meron ganon. So, kung meron ka namang civil case, you have to be summoned. You have to be given subpoena to be presented to court for witnessing or testifying. So yun yung importante. Everything can be taken away from you, provided there is a valid notice. Kasi pag binigyan ka ng notice, that is the time na nire-raise mo lahat ng defenses mo eh. That is the time na ginagather mo lahat yung proof para patunayan na hindi ka liable for the alleged crime or offense. So, pag hindi ka binigyan ng ganong opportunity, then there is a violation of due process of law. It is axiomatic in democratic society that no one should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So, nasa democratic form of government lang yan, due process of law. Pag non-democratic form of government, yung power is the mightiest. Kaya may notice yan or wala. Pagka naanahan ka, edi matatanggalan ka ng life, liberty, and property. But in a democratic form of government, we need that due process of law. To be given a chance to be heard and to present a case according to the rules set forth by the authorities before any action can be taken. Failing this, an action of the government to take one's life, liberty, or property is void and of no effect. The taxpayers and the government must be mindful of the observance of the due process of law in order to be well equipped in protecting their respective rights. A violation of due process makes the actions of the government invalid and gives the taxpayers an added legal basis to request the cancellation of the assessment. So kapag wala kang notice at hindi naman na na-audit talaga yung libro, then the taxpayer may request for the cancellation of assessment or that the assessment may be set aside. Ganito kasi ang process niyan sa BIR. Every year, yung mga businesses, magpa-file sila ng income tax return. Yung income tax return na yon is voluntary. Meaning to say, kung ano yung declaration, yung findings ng owner mismo ng business as to the net income and sales and other expenses, ina-accept ng BIR yan without audit. Hindi ka natatanungin, yan ba yung declaration mo? Sige, tanggapin namin yung income tax return mo. Tatatakan namin yan na receipt. But, within 3 years, the BIR is authorized to conduct an investigation on that declaration. Pwedeng i-inquire ng BIR yung libro ng taxpayer para malaman kung totoo nga yung dineclare niya doon sa income tax return na sinubmit niya sa BIR. Now, the commissioner will issue a letter of authority. Yun yung authority na binibigay doon sa examiner para i-conduct yung investigation to determine compliance with the rules on taxation. Yun yung notice na kailangan. Without that notice, hindi pwedeng ibigay ng taxpayer yung kanyang document dun sa taong gustong kumuha ng documents niya. Kunyari, may nagpunta sa kanya, taga BIR ako. Kailangan kong tignan yung libro mo. I-investigahan ko yan. Kailangan ng notice. Kung wala yung notice na yon, wala yung letter of authority na yon, pwede mo siyang paalisin. Parang pulis lang, nagpunta sa bahay mo, aarestuhin ka, walang warrant of arrest, pwede mo paalisin yung pulis. Because there is no due process on that. So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng due process notice. So, sa BIR naman, yung preliminary notice will be the letter of authority para maimbestigahan yung case mo. Now, sasabihin ng examiner, ito ang kukolektahin namin sa'yo. Asan ang notice? Hihingi ka na naman ng panibagong notice. You call that assessment notice. Yung notice na yun, magsasaad kung ano ang tax liability mo based on his investigation. Without that assessment notice, you cannot pay to the examiner kasi wala pa yung notice eh. So these are the processes these are the processes that have to be followed para ma-achieve yung justice in the collection and of taxes, in the collection and payment of taxes or payment of taxes. So, in recent decision promulgated by the Court of Tax Appeals in Manasoft Technology Corporation versus Commissioner of Internal Revenue, in the said case, the taxpayer was assessed for income tax, VAT, and expanded withholding tax deficiencies for taxable year 2008. The letter of authority, notice of informal conference. Take note of these letters. These are notices na kailangan ma-comply ng BIR bago talaga masabing yung taxpayer ay culpable or liable. The letter of authority, notice of informal conference, preliminary assessment notice, as well as the final assessment notice were personally served at the office of the taxpayer. In fact, the taxpayer was able to file a protest over the final assessment notice. Nonetheless, no final decision on disputed assessment was issued to the taxpayer, but instead, a warrant of restraint and levy was received by the taxpayer. This prompted the taxpayer to file a request for the investigation, but the BIR issued a letter denying the request. Thus, the filing of the case with the Court of Tax Appeals. In its petition, the taxpayer alleged that the BIR violated its right to due process by failing to follow BIR Regulation 12-99 on service of notice of informal conference, preliminary assessment notice, and final assessment notice. The CTA ruled in favor of the taxpayer and held that the assessment is void for failure to serve the notice of notice of informal conference and preliminary assessment notice to the taxpayer. A violation of taxpayers' right to due process. This fatal defect in the service of notices necessarily makes the assessment unlawful or in violation of the due process. So, anong sabi? Kasi kailangan personally served to the taxpayer. Pero ito kasi hindi personally served doon sa taxpayer. Kasi iniwan lang yata ito doon sa security guard eh. So, meron apat na maraming ito. Magsisimula ka sa letter of authority. Itong ibig sabihin nito, binibigyan ng authority itong tao na to para i-conduct yung investigation ng kaso mo, ng libro mo. Tapos, yung tao na yon, yung examiner na inutusan ng commissioner, magbibigay ng notice of informal conference. Kumbaga, pag-uusapan nyo kung paano kung ano-ano ang mga naging declaration nyo doon sa income tax return. Tapos magko-conduct na ng investigation yung examiner na yan. Magbibigay na yan ng initial findings niya. So, i-issue siya ng preliminary assessment notice or PAN. So, pag nabigay na yung preliminary assessment notice, yung taxpayer, magpe-present naman siya ng kanyang reason kung bakit hindi dapat ganon yung kanyang assessment. So, pwede silang mag-usap, i-explain ng taxpayer dun sa examiner na may findings kayong ganito. Ito document namin to prove na hindi yan tamang findings nyo. So, kung agreeable na yung examiner, masaset aside yung assessment. Pero kung hindi, at naniniwala naman yung taxpayer na tama siya, the taxpayer can present a notice of protest to the BIR. Ipo-protest niyo na hindi ako pumapayag dyan sa assessment na yan. Kasi ito ang documents namin. And then ito yung computation na dapat. So, kapag ganon, pwedeng mag-conduct ng re-investigation ang BIR. Titignan muli yung libro to determine kung tama nga ba yung assertion o sinasabi ng taxpayer. Now, kung sa tingin ng examiner, hindi naman valid yung assertion ng taxpayer, he can go on with the final assessment notice. Now, itong final assessment notice should be personally served to the taxpayer. Ito naman kasi sa case na to, it was personally served at the office of the taxpayer, hindi dun sa taxpayer mismo. So kung hindi mismo yung taxpayer ang tumanggap, then it has no force and effect against the taxpayer. Kasi parang warrant of arrest yan. Hindi mo pwedeng i-serve dun sa katabi yung warrant of arrest at naging warrant of arrest na nung ina-arrest mo. Kunyari, arrestuhin ko to si A, pero serve ko yung notice kay B. Di aarestuhin ko na si A, wala akong notice. It should not be so. So, tatanggalin mo ng property yung tao eh. Therefore, dapat yung tao mismo ang makatanggap ng assessment notice. That is why the CTA, the Court of Tax Appeals, render judgment in favor of the taxpayer. Kasi sa office lang na-serve, hindi doon sa taxpayer personally. So when I was an examiner, talagang hahanapin ko talaga yung owner ng business. Hanggat di ko nakikita yung owner at di ko nakakausap yung owner at di ko na-evaluate na talaga siya yung owner, hindi ko bibigay yung aking letter of authority. And then pag nagawa ko na yan, syempre nakita ko na yung taxpayer sa letter of authority pa lang. Paggawa ko na ng examination, pagbigay ko ng preliminary assessment notice, hanapin ko uli yung taxpayer. Eto yung assessment notice. So, hindi pwedeng tamad ka at ibibigay mo lang dun sa ibang tao. Kailangan kung sino yung liable, yun yung kakausapin mo. Hindi ka pwedeng magbigay dun sa opisina niya, sa secretary niya, sa anak niya. Hindi pwede. Kasi tinatanggalan mo ng property yung tao eh. Parang a warrant of arrest yan. Ang ina-aresto mo nga lang, yung property, hindi yung tao. Section 3 of 1299 provides for the due process requirements in the issuance of deficiency tax assessment. it prescribes the mode of procedure for service of the notices, especially Section 3.1.4 of the said regulation, which provides that if final assessment notice was served by personal delivery, the taxpayer or his duly authorized representative shall acknowledge receipt thereof in the duplicate copy of the letter of demand showing his name, signature, designation, and authority to act for and in behalf of the taxpayer. If acknowledged received by a person other than the taxpayer himself and date of receipt thereof. Kung authorized representative lang, kailangan yung mga authorization requirements. Considering that the BIR has miserably failed to discharge its burden of proving that the notices was duly served on taxpayers' duly authorized representatives, it is thus a necessary conclusion that the said assessment is not validly issued, therefore it is void. So, importante yon na dun mismo sa tao. The importance of service of tax assessment is emphasized in this case since only when taxpayers are duly informed of the alleged tax deficiency and are given the opportunity to contest the assessment can the government validly proceed to collect on the tax due. While taxes are the lifeblood of the government, the power to tax has its limits. In spite of all its plenitude, in other words, while the BIR may have a legal right to assess the taxpayers, it must be done in accordance with the rules. Otherwise, any government action is void and of no effect. Okay? We go to the equal protection. So it is the right of a person or entity or property to be treated the same under like circumstance. All persons subject to legislation shall be treated alike under similar circumstances and conditions, both in the privileges conferred and liabilities imposed. The doctrine does not require that persons or properties different in fact be treated in law as though they were the same. What it prohibits is class legislation, which discriminates against some and favors others. As long as there are rational and reasonable grounds for so doing, the Congress may group persons or property to be taxed, and it is sufficient if all members of the same class are subject to the same rate and the tax is administered impartially upon them. Equal protection has been traditionally defined by the Supreme Court as guarantee that laws will treat alike persons who are similarly situated and treat differently those who are differently situated. Classic examples of laws that mean to attain equal protection are tax laws. Everyone earning an income is taxed, and the rates of tax are based on the same standards for persons similarly situated. So, maraming cases ang ang na legislate na batas with that creates classification of taxpayers, and these are the requisites for the valid classification of taxpayers. This must be based on substantial distinctions. Kanina na-discuss na natin to, no? Germane to the purpose of the law. Classification must not be limited to existing conditions, but also apply to future conditions and substantially identical to of the present. It must apply equally to all class and members. So, na-discuss na natin yan kanina na in-emphasize ko lang dito kasi doon magkadikit sila sa equal protection of the law. Excuse me for a while, ha? So we're going to just finish the discussion on constitutional limitations for today. So next meeting, we're going to have discussion again on different topics na. So every meeting, discussion na tayo. So here is another case on ito yung case dun sa equal protection of the law. These are the facts. The Municipal Board of Manila enacted Ordinance 6537 requiring aliens, except those employed in the diplomatic consular missions of foreign countries, in technical assistance programs of the government in another country, and the members of religious orders or congregations, to procure the requisite mayor's permit so as to be employed or engaged in trade or in the city of Manila. So nag-require ng mayor's permit para makapagtrabaho itong mga aliens na to. So the permit fee is 50 pesos and the penalty for the violation of the ordinance is 3 to 6 months imprisonment or a fine of 100 to 200 or both. Issue: whether the ordinance imposes a regulatory fee or a tax. The ordinance purpose is clearly to raise money under the guise of regulation by exacting 50 pesos from aliens who have been cleared for employment. The amount is unreasonable and excessive because it fails to consider difference in situation among aliens required to pay it, being casual, permanent, part-time, rank and file, or executive. The ordinance was declared invalid as it is arbitrary, oppressive, and unreasonable, being applied only to aliens who are thus deprived of their rights to life, liberty, and property, and therefore violates the due process and equal protection of the law of the Constitution. So ito yung similar lang ito dun sa sinasabi ko kanina na piso kokolektahin sa lahat ng tao sa Pilipinas. Yun lang yung tax. Kung titingnan mo, piso lang, mura lang. Pero wala kasing valid classification, then that becomes a violation of the equal protection of law. So I just presented to you a case to illustrate that illustration, okay? So Article on Bill of Rights, Section 5. Article 3, no law shall be made respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, the free exercise and enjoyment of religious profession and worship, without discrimination or preference, shall forever be allowed, nor religious test shall be required for the exercise of civil or political rights. Ito naman, no law shall be made respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Ito yung sa taxation naman, no tax shall be passed or made to fund for religious to be used for religious purposes. Hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yung public funds for religious purposes. In the same manner na yung religious activities are not taxable. Hindi pwedeng magpondo para sa simbahan. Hindi rin pwedeng i-tax ang mga nasa simbahan. Or the religious activities or religious entities cannot be taxed, nor money shall be appropriated for their purposes. Hindi mo pwedeng i-tax at hindi mo rin pwedeng kolektahan ng tax. Bakit? Sinasabi natin yung separation of church and state. Now, bakit hindi pwede? Bakit hindi mo pwedeng i-tax ang simbahan? Why? I always ask this question. Bakit ba hindi pwedeng i-tax ang simbahan? Dahil ba gusto lang nating gusto nating hindi sila i-tax? Feel lang ng estado na wag i-tax. For no reason at all. Bakit hindi natin pwedeng i-tax ang simbahan? Sino ba ang leader ng bawat simbahan? Sa Catholic Church, sabi nila Pope daw eh. Pero sa lahat ng simbahan, regardless of the kind of church, sino ba ang ultimate leader ng lahat ng simbahan? So God. Ang Diyos ang manager ng lahat ng simbahan. But whatever kind of church is that, be it is Islam, Buddhism, Islam, or Buddhism, or Judaism, or whatever kind of religion. Ang hinahanap lang naman niyan ay Diyos. Ang sinisilbihan lang naman nila ay Diyos. So, nakalagay naman yun eh, di ba? No servant can be greater than the master. So, yung state is but a servant serving a master. Therefore, the church cannot be taxed because the ultimate leader of the church is the ultimate master, who is God. So, hindi mo pwedeng i-tax ang Diyos. Servant ka lang eh. Now, bakit naman hindi pwedeng gamitan ng public funds ang simbahan? Bakit hindi pwedeng, na-answer na natin yung bakit hindi pwedeng i-tax ang simbahan? Because no servant can be greater than his master. Now, bakit naman hindi pwedeng gamitin ang public funds para sa simbahan? Because God is the ultimate owner of everything found in the universe. Siya lahat ang may-ari nito. Therefore, hindi niya kailangan ang pera ng servant. Kung pag-aari niya lahat ng nandito sa mundo, hindi niya kailangan kung ano ang nasa mundo. Therefore, no public fund can be given to the church kasi hindi mo naman pwedeng bigyan yung may-ari mismo eh. He is so generous to give us all these things. Eh bakit natin ibabalik sa kanya? Yun yung reason bakit we cannot use public funds for religious purposes. Kasi God yung may-ari ng religion and He is all providential. He is all providing. So there is no need for Him to require taxes from the people. No law impairing the obligations of contracts shall be passed. So, pag sinabi natin no law impairing the ito yung Congress gumagawa ng batas. At the same time, yung Congress din gumagawa ng batas for giving franchise. Ito yung sa ABS-CBN eh, na kaso, di ba? Yung franchise ng ABS-CBN ay nag-expire na yun eh. Ang problema sa ABS-CBN, nag-expire na yung kontrata nila. So, dapat i-renew yan ng Congress. Eh, dahil hindi ni-renew ng Congress, hindi na sila makakooperate. Therefore, ang another resolution dyan is to file for another franchise contract. Kung makakako sila ng kontrata for a panibagong franchise. Pero yung sa ABS-CBN, nag-expire na yan eh. So, nasa Congress na ngayon yung opportunity na i-cancel yung kontrata. Now, pero what if existing pa yung contract ng ABS-CBN? And then nag-file ng bill or nag-propose ng bill para i-cancel lahat ng mga franchise sa mga TV station. Lahat without distinction. Pwede ba yon? Kasi magbibigay sa ng panibagong kontrata. Pwede ba yon? Hindi. Kasi may existing obligations and contracts na. The Congress cannot create a law impairing these obligations on contracts. So, anong ibig sabihin? Bakit bawal? Kasi yung Estado napaka-powerful niyan. And then itong private people mag-e-enter ng contract sa Estado. Now, if the Congress has the power to impair the contract between the people and the government, then wala na magtitiwala sa gobyerno. Hindi ako e-enter ng kontrata sa gobyerno nyo kapag kaya palang sirain ng Kongreso ang kontrata. So this is a very important protection for the investor or for people who are going to transact with the government. So, no person, Article 3, Bill of Rights, Section 20 tayo. No person shall be imprisoned for payment for debt or non-payment of poll tax. So, yung poll tax, yun lang yung residence fee mo. Kunyari, dun sa cedula mo, meron kang 15 pesos na basic. Yun lang yung hindi ka makukulong pag di ka nagbayad ng 15 pesos. Pero kasi dun sa cedula, meron dong income tax at meron dong property tax. Dun sa property tax and income tax, pwede ka makulong dun. Kasi hindi naman yon poll tax. Now, yung debt naman, it should be an honest debt. Pero kung meron ka ng delay at merong fraud, then you can be imprisoned for that. Yung example ko dito, kunyari dun sa Ondoy, noong araw Ondoy. Ano ba yung huling bagyo? Ulysses na. Kasi yung example ko 2008 pa. Ito ngayon, 2020 na. So we'll go to Ulysses. So si Ulysses, kunyari may kontrata. Kailan ba nangyari yung Ulysses? Before kunyari yung kontrata mo to pay is before the arrival of Ulysses. Hindi ka nakabayad. Pwede ka bang makulong? Natanggal na yung Ulysses lahat yung property mo. Pwede ka pa rin makulong. Kasi yung due date nun before Ulysses hindi ka nagbayad. So there was delay. And if there is delay, there is a presumption of fraud. Kapag di ka nakabayad, may presumption ng fraud. Kasi you promised to pay on a certain due date and then you are not able to pay on that due date, nandaloko ka na. So, kapag may fraud, pwede ka na makulong. What if ang due date mo ay after the Ulysses? Tapos di ka na nakabayad kasi inabot na ng baha yung property mo, wala ka ng means to pay. So, anong mangyayari? You are exempt. You cannot be imprisoned for non-payment of debt. Ito kasi mga Pilipino, pag nakitang no person shall be imprisoned for debt or non-payment of poll tax, akala nila lahat ng utang na hindi na sila makukulong. Utang ngayon ng utang. Kaya maraming Pilipino mahilig umutang. Because ang understanding nila, hindi sila pwedeng makulong sa pangungutang. No. Makukulong ka sa pangungutang kung may fraud. Kapag nangako ka ang due date tapos di ka nagbayad, makukulong ka kasi nanloko ka. Ang sinasabi lang dito, kapag yung honest debt siya na hindi ka makakabayad, within the due date ka pa tapos nagkaroon ng occurrences na mag-prohibit sa'yo para makabayad ka. So, the next one will be all revenue or tariff bills shall originate exclusively in the House of Representatives. So, ang mga batas kasi can originate from the Senate or can originate from the House of Representatives. So, pagka tariff bills or revenue bills, katulad ng train law, di ba? Meron tayong train law, revenue bill yun. When it comes to income, taxation, and tariff bills, these shall originate exclusively in the House of Representatives. Hindi siya kagad pwede manggaling sa Senate, House of Senate. Kailangan magsimula siya sa House of Representatives. Yun lang ibig sabihin nun. Then number 8, no law granting any tax exemption shall be passed without the concurrence of the majority of all the members of Congress. So ordinarily, a law, an ordinary law, not a tax law or exemption law rather, tax exemption law, can be passed by the majority of the quorum. Meaning to say, meron ng quorum and then yung majority ng quorum na yon ay pwede na mag-approve ng bill. Now, pagdating sa tax exemption, mas maraming tao ang kailangan kasi majority of all the members of the Congress. Kung meron kang 374 na members ng Congress, At kunyari, ang kailangan lang sa quorum ay 124. Yung 124, majority ng 124, yun, pwede na magpasaya ng ordinary law. Pero pagdating sa tax exemption, yung 324 na yun, yung majority nun ang dapat mag-approve ng tax exemption, which is marami, diba? Divide mo ang 324 by 2 plus 1. Kasi majority is divide by 2 plus 1, diba? 324 divide by 2 will be 162 plus 1, 163 ang kailangan nating boto. Pero yung sinabi ko kanina, kunyari, 324, tapos ang quorum will be, let's say, 1/4 lang. Divide by 4. That will be the quorum. 600, ano ba yun? 324 divide by, sabihin na natin majority ang quorum. So, majority is quorum. So, 324 divide by 2 plus 1, 163 uli. Pero, sa pagboto, ang kailangan lang nun ay majority of the quorum. So, meron kang 324 divide by 2, 163 divide by 2, pwede ka na magpasa by 99 votes or 100 votes. Pwede ka na magpasa ng batas. Pero pagdating sa tax exemption, kailangan mo ay 163. Bakit ganon? Ang laki ng difference. 63, kailangan mo ng 63 votes. Because the nature of taxation is to collect taxes. Pag tax exemption yan, hindi ka kokolekta ng taxes. So, anong mangyayari? Mababawasan yung taxes ng Estado. Ang sabi, taxes are the lifeblood of the nation. Parang binabawasan mo yung dugo mo. Parang nagba-bloodletting ka. Nagbabawas ka ng dugo. And this is a normal activity. Kasi ang normal activity mo, magparami ka, magpaganda ka ng dugo mo, tatanggalan ka ng dugo. So, kailangan ng matinding pag-iisip at kailangan matinding consideration. Hindi ka basta gagawa ng ganon. So, ganon din sa tax exemption. Kapag tax exemption, dahil babawasan mo yung income mo, then kailangan maraming tao o maraming legislators ang mag-usap-usap para tiyakin na tama nga yung action na yan. Kasi otherwise, magsasuffer yung public coffer or yung ating pondo. Next, no public money shall be appropriated, applied, paid, or employed directly or indirectly for the use, benefit, and support of any sect, church, denomination, sectarian institution, or a system of religion, or any priest, preacher, minister, or other religious teacher or dignitary as such, except when such priest, preacher, minister, or dignitary is assigned to the armed forces or to any penal institution or government, orphanage, or leprosarium. So, na-discuss ko na yung first portion yan, yung bakit hindi mo pwedeng gastusin yung pera, public money, sa mga churches and religious organizations or religious persons. Pwera na lang, exemption to that is that kung yung priest, preacher, minister, or dignitary is assigned to the armed forces or to any penal institution or government orphanage or leprosarium. Yun, pwedeng pagbigyan ng pondo yung mga yun. Kasi nagsaserve sila dun sa mga governmental institutions. All money, ito tayo sa next, number 10. All money collected on any tax levied for a special purpose shall be treated as a special fund and paid out for such purposes only. If the purpose for which a special fund was created has been fulfilled or abandoned, the balance, if any, shall be transferred to the general funds of the government. Tax money collected for a special purpose shall be treated as a special fund. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Meron kasing general fund tayo at saka special fund. Ang tawag doon yung trust fund. Hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yung trust fund para sa general or general operations ng government. Yung operation ng government will be yung to finance the projects, Pero kung na-set aside yung fund na yan for a special purpose, hindi yan pwedeng gamitin for general operations. Number 11, the Supreme Court shall have the following powers. All cases involving the legality of any tax, imposed, assessment, or toll, or penalty imposed in relation thereto. So the Supreme Court has the power to inquire into the legality of any tax imposed. Hindi pwedeng mawala yung power na yon ng Supreme Court. Hindi pwedeng ang magdi-decide lang lahat ay BIR or Bureau of Customs. So kung merong question of law and question of fact na dapat i-resolve, the Supreme Court has the power to inquire into that. All revenues, number 12, all revenues and assets of non-stock, non-profit institution used directly and exclusively for educational purposes shall be exempt from tax and duties. Kanina, ang discussion natin is about religious organization. Ito naman, educational institutions. Bakit ang educational institutions ay parang religion din na tax exempt? Bakit? Bakit yung properties used directly and exclusively for educational purposes are not taxed? Ano ba ang ibig sabihin nun? Bakit? Gusto lang bang hindi i-tax yun? Trip namin huwag bigyan ng tax ng educational institution. There must be a reason behind that. Why? Why educational institutions are not taxed? Kasi God, ano ba ang Diyos? God was first what? Under the Old Testament, God was wisdom. Diba? Ang Diyos naman ay katalinuhan. So, ano ba ang tinuturo ng mga educational institution? It is wisdom. So, educational institutions are instruments of God sharing His wisdom to people. Therefore, being an agent of God, this educational institution, or being an instrument of God, this educational institution cannot be taxed. Next. Wala na ba? Ay, umandar ng aking ano. So, ano pang susunod? In the same manner, ano ba yung, wala dito yung ano yung charitable institutions, di ba? Meron din tayong charitable institutions. Ito rin, continuation ito. Subject to conditions prescribed by law, all grants, endowments, donations, or contribution used actually, directly, and exclusively for educational purposes shall be exempt from tax. So, pareho lang yan. Pero merong isa na hindi na include dito, which is the non-taxability of charitable institutions. Diba? Meron nun charitable institutions. Ano din ang reason bakit yung mga charitable institutions ay non-taxable? What do you mean by charity? Charity is mercy, habag. Kaya ka nagbibigay kasi nahahabag ka. Charity is mercy. And mercy is the seed of love. And love is God. That is why charitable institutions cannot also be taxed, because charitable institutions are bearers of the seeds of love. Meaning to say, they are the bearers of the seeds of God. Therefore, charitable institutions cannot be taxed. Okay? That ends up our discussion for our limitations, constitutional limitations on the power of taxation. Having known these limitations, alam nyo na kung ano ngayon ang taxable at hindi taxable. Kapag babangga dito sa constitutional limitations, then that is invalid. Dalawa yung ating pinag-aralang limitations, the inherent limitations and the constitutional limitations. Ang sabi ko nga, the power of taxation is likened into a straight line without endpoints. What is a straight line without endpoints? A straight line without endpoints is an infinity. But the law does not want it to be infinite. But the state is a limitable entity. Therefore, we also have to limit the power of taxation. So these two limitations are the ones that define the power of taxation. Thank you for listening. Now you can open your microphone for questions. Meron ba kayong questions? Or it is much better if you can chat your question. So, may recall para ma-answeran natin. Sige, open nyo na yung mga camera nyo and you chat your questions on the discussion. Open na. Baka tulog na kayo dyan. Open the microphone and open the camera so we can discuss now after that discussion kung may nakinig nga ba. Ito yung question, yung sa PhilHealth. Hindi naman taxation yung PhilHealth eh, contribution yun eh. SSS contribution tong mga to. Wala tayo, hindi natin topic yon. So, it is a question of legality on the part of the Congress. But this is not a tax law eh. It is a form of ano kasi itong SSS contributions and PhilHealth. Parang proprietary function ito, hindi to governmental function kasi parang kinikip lang ng PhilHealth at SSS yung pera for the benefit of the members. Yung members lang, hindi public in general. Open na. Absent ang hindi naka-open ng camera at saka hindi naka-unmute. Wala na ba ibang question? Walang question, walang napakinggan eh.
Wala po akong camera.
Sige. Chat your question here. Wala nang question? Walang napakinggan. Baka natutulog kayo habang naka-close yan. Anyway, we're trying to... Ewan ko, na-record ko to. Pag di ko na-record, hindi natin to mauulit. Dapat nakinig ko. Okay? Anong oras na ba? 10 o'clock. Hanggang anong oras ba tayo? 30. So, we'll call it a day. Then, kung may mga questions kayo, ilagay nyo na lang dun sa sa group chat. So, we can answer your question. So far, isa lang yung tanong, pero hindi pa relevant sa taxation. Next meeting, we're going to discuss, ano na ba next meeting natin? We're going to discuss the principles of taxation, manifestation of sound tax system, elements of the sound tax system. Okay. Basta next meeting, be prepared for discussion again. Okay, let's call it a day. Bye-bye. Keep safe. And kung na tong ating discussion, tignan ko kung na-record natin para you can review our discussion here. Ayun, lumipat.